My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am 32 years old. Today marks exactly 3 years since I made the most difficult decision of my life, walking away from my family forever. People always ask me how someone can just abandon their blood relatives, as if family bonds are unbreakable chains that should never be severed. But they don't understand what I endured for decades, the slow poisoning of my soul that happened behind closed doors, masked by holiday gatherings and family photos that painted a perfect picture to the outside world. It started when I was 7 years old, though I didn't recognize the patterns then. My mother, Patricia, had this way of making me feel like I was constantly disappointing her, no matter how hard I tried to please her. She would criticize everything from the way I held my fork to how I laughed too loudly, always with this particular tone that made me feel small and worthless. My father, Robert, was emotionally absent, hiding behind his newspaper and work obligations, leaving me to navigate my mother's unpredictable moods alone. The house I grew up in was beautiful on the surface, a colonial-style home with perfectly manicured gardens that my mother tended to obsessively. But inside those walls, I felt like I was suffocating. Every room held memories of harsh words, impossible expectations, and the constant feeling that I was walking on eggshells. My younger brother David seemed to escape most of this treatment, being the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. School became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt I could breathe freely. I threw myself into academics, hoping that good grades would finally earn my mother's approval. When I brought home straight A's, she would find something else to criticize. Maybe my handwriting wasn't neat enough, or I should have participated more in class discussions. Nothing was ever enough. The goalpost kept moving, and I kept chasing it like a fool. By the time I reached high school, I had developed severe anxiety and what I now recognize as depression. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations with my mother, analyzing every word to figure out what I had done wrong this time. I started having panic attacks during family dinners, my chest tightening as I anticipated the next criticism or passive-aggressive comment disguised as concern. My father's silence was almost worse than my mother's verbal attacks. He would sit there, witnessing her treatment of me, and say nothing. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with what seemed like sympathy, but he never intervened. His cowardice felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than my mother's cruelty. At least she was consistent in her behavior. He gave me false hope that someone in that house might actually protect me. The breaking point came during my senior year when I was accepted to several prestigious universities. Instead of celebration, my mother's first response was to worry about the cost and question whether I was smart enough to succeed. She suggested I attend community college instead, to save money and stay closer to home. I realized then that she didn't want me to succeed, she wanted me to remain dependent and small. College was supposed to be my escape, but even hundreds of miles away, my mother's influence followed me like a shadow. She would call multiple times a week, asking invasive questions about my grades, my friends, and my activities. If I didn't answer her calls immediately, she would leave increasingly frantic voicemails, accusing me of being ungrateful and forgetting my family. The guilt was overwhelming, and I found myself apologizing for things that weren't even my fault. During my sophomore year, I started seeing a therapist at the campus counseling center. Dr. Martinez was the first person who helped me understand that my family dynamics weren't normal. She introduced me to terms like emotional abuse and gaslighting, words that suddenly gave meaning to experiences I had always dismissed as just my mother being difficult. It was both liberating and terrifying to realize that my childhood trauma was real and valid. The therapy sessions were painful but necessary. I had to confront the reality that my mother's love was conditional and manipulative. She used guilt, shame, and fear to control me, making me believe that I was lucky to have her, that no one else would ever love me the way she did. The twisted irony was that her version of love felt like suffocation, not affection. I started setting small boundaries, like limiting our phone calls to once a week instead of daily. My mother's reaction was explosive. She accused me of being influenced by bad friends, of thinking I was better than my family now that I was in college. She played the victim perfectly, crying about how much she missed me and how ungrateful I had become. The manipulation was so subtle and practiced that I almost fell back into old patterns. Junior year brought new challenges when I started dating someone seriously for the first time. Marcus was kind, patient, and everything I thought I didn't deserve. When I brought him home for Thanksgiving, my mother's behavior was mortifying. She interrogated him like he was applying for a job, made snide comments about his background, and later told me privately that I could do better. Her disapproval wasn't based on anything substantial. She simply couldn't stand the idea of me being happy with someone else. The holidays became increasingly difficult. Every visit home felt like stepping back into quicksand, where all the progress I had made in therapy seemed to evaporate. My mother had this uncanny ability to find my vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. She would make comments about my appearance, my career choices, and my relationship that were designed to undermine my confidence and make me doubt myself. My brother David had grown into a carbon copy of our father, passive and unwilling to acknowledge the dysfunction in our family. When I tried to talk to him about our mother's behavior, he would dismiss my concerns as oversensitivity or suggest that I was remembering things wrong. The gaslighting wasn't just coming from my parents anymore, it was a family-wide conspiracy of denial that made me question my own sanity. During my final semester, I made a decision that would change everything. I chose to attend graduate school across the country, as far from home as possible. My mother's reaction was predictably dramatic. She accused me of abandoning the family, of being selfish and ungrateful. She threatened to cut off financial support and made me feel guilty for pursuing my dreams. But for the first time in my life, I didn't back down. I was beginning to understand that her approval was not worth sacrificing my happiness. Graduate school in California felt like entering a different world. The physical distance from my family gave me perspective I had never had before. I could finally see how abnormal my childhood had been, how the constant criticism and emotional manipulation had shaped every aspect of my personality. I was 24 years old and just beginning to discover who I was outside of my mother's influence. I continued therapy with a new counselor, Dr. Chen, who specialized in family trauma. She helped me understand that healing would require more than just physical distance. I needed to emotionally detach from the toxic patterns that had defined my relationships. This meant learning to trust my own perceptions and stop seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it. The phone calls from home became increasingly strained. My mother would guilt-trip me about missing family events, about choosing my education over family obligations. She made my father and brother call to convince me to visit more often, using them as emotional messengers. The manipulation was so ingrained in their family system that they probably didn't even realize they were being used as weapons against me. During my second year of graduate school, something shifted inside me. I started to feel angry, really angry, for the first time in my life. I had spent so many years blaming myself, thinking I was too sensitive or difficult, that I had never allowed myself to feel the rage that was rightfully mine. The anger was terrifying but also empowering. It meant I was finally recognizing that what happened to me was wrong and that I deserved better. I met my future husband, James.